Katelyn, I did something very dumb this week.
Oh, no. What'd you do?
Well, I looked up a house I used to own in Colorado on Zillow just to see what it's worth now.
Ooh, in this economy, that's masochistic.
Truly. It is now worth 3 times what it was when I lived there. 3 times.
So maybe we're realizing that there is something about this whole home ownership thing that makes financial sense.
Yeah, maybe so. Live and learn. But it's so much more fun to kill cockroaches in apartments in Brooklyn.
I miss my cockroach friends.
From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from 2 Christian women with Zillow envy in their hearts, overcome with lust for a fixed-rate mortgage. I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Katelyn Beatty.
I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. This week on The State of Belief, Voices from the Road, conversations recorded along the way as Interfaith Alliance Vote is Sacred bus tour roars across the country.
We can choose to love our neighbors. We can choose to bring that love to the ballot box, because that is what democracy looks like.
The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Distributed by Religion News Service Podcasts and available on your favorite podcast app.
I kind of want to look up this home now. Maybe later. Just curious.
When I was looking at this home on Zillow, I let curiosity get the better of me and looked up the pictures of the last time it was listed. To my surprise, they were for some reason still using the same pictures from when I lived there. And this was a house that my ex-husband and I had bought and got renovated ourselves. That was something that we did when we were married to 3 different houses. And all the pictures they had all of our stuff in them, stuff from almost 20 years ago now.
Wow.
Anyway, it was wild to see. It brought up a lot of feelings.
Were you surprised by the intensity of the feelings, given that you divorced over a decade ago and you're happily remarried?
In some ways, they were less triggering, maybe, than I thought they would be. I mean, it was weird. Like I could see in one of the photos, like our wedding picture. It almost felt voyeuristic in a way, like looking at these old photos, because it was just such a different time period for me. And some of like the sharpness of it has faded. I don't always know what to do with memories from that period of my life, because like I was really proud of the work that we did on that house, for example. And I have a lot of good memories from that time period in that house, and both with my ex-husband and with friends. And, it was my 20s. I feel a tenderness toward it, but also like there's just such a strange, it's tinted by the reality that like all of those memories and all of that time period was spent with this person that I'm no longer with.
Yeah. Not that a broken engagement is nearly as painful and weighty as a divorce, but shortly after I got engaged in 2012, like within the first month, because of course we were on a fast track to the wedding.
Of course.
My mom came for a weekend in Chicago and we went wedding dress shopping. And so we took all these photos of me trying on different wedding dresses. And, I bought one. I have no idea where that dress is now. I think my mom did something with it. I have no idea where it is.
Oh my gosh. Well, actually, I don't know where my first wedding dress is either.
Honestly, I don't like it anymore. Anyway.
There you go. Silver lining.
I deleted all these anything related to that wedding dress shopping, I deleted at some point. But first, they're still somehow in the cloud. And so maybe every 6 months or once a year, they will pop up on my, under my memories.
That function. It is a special kind of torture.
Yeah, just like a weird digital cruelty. Like, I'm not going to let you forget that experience. And then how everything completely fell apart and how devastated you were. Like, there's no way to look at pictures from that time without thinking, this is where we were in the meltdown of our engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't look up things about him.
No.
Occasionally, I
No.
come across things, as we
Right.
established in our recent episode about our biggest whoopsie daisies.
Yeah, I don't look up my ex anymore either, but I do think one of the hardest things about getting divorced is losing the keeper of some of the memories of your life, this person who you experienced them all with. So you lose that, and then you also lose, I don't know, the memories of, I was married for 10 years and I had a lot of really good memories.
And also such a formative time.
Yeah, and there's all these places we would go often camping in Colorado, or the beaches that we really enjoyed in Florida. I want to have good memories of those things because I do, but there's always this like sharp kind of jagged edge to those memories. And I think that's one of the more like ongoing painful things about being divorced, is losing a certain innocence around a time of your life.
Are those memories complicated because they bring up feelings of failure?
I don't know if it's failure or just loss, but it is different. It's different than like when I see a picture of my dad. So I guess maybe it's partly failure. Like pictures of my dad or memories with my dad have still a sweetness to them. But seeing pictures of my ex or of that time period, like even when they were happy memories, it's hard to hold them with a sweetness or a tenderness toward them, because there's always sort of this unnatural end. When someone dies, that's a natural end. It's sad, it's tragic, you always miss the person. But a divorce is such a ripping apart that it's hard to look back at those memories and not in your mind be like, well, that's going to end,
As I've gotten older and more friends have gotten divorced over the last decade, and hearing their stories has reframed like what divorce is, and has reminded me that if one person in the marriage does not want to stay, the other person can't make that decision for them, no matter how much they want it.
Oh, man. Yes.
I think when we talk about divorce and Christian faith, it's just a really humbling reminder that like we don't know most of the time the dynamics of a marriage from the outside. And oftentimes there is a sense of like, I don't know if abandonment is too strong a word, but you can have all the right beliefs about marriage, but at the end of the day, you cannot force another person to stay in a marriage with you.
That was a hard learned lesson for me. Well, you and I really became friends during the period where I was learning that lesson. There were about 2 years between when my ex-husband, when he said, I want a divorce, and when we actually got divorced. And those 2 years, by far and away, like the darkest period of my life. And that was really just a long process of letting go and having to figure out, sort of releasing a death grip that I had on the marriage. And in so much of that was because I grew up evangelical, the sense that this was one of the worst things that a person could ever do. I mean, to have sex before you were married and then to get divorced. Like those were, the two, they felt like the biggest sins, nearly unforgivable,
And then like third is like robbing a bank.
Way down below the other two.
Getting divorced, way down there, robbing a bank, committing some kind of felon. Yeah. How could you not have internalized a sense of, if I am a person who gets divorced, I am bad?
Yeah. And of course, you just never think that would happen to you. There's a lot of like very unhelpful ways I think that divorce gets framed within churches when they're trying to tell you not to get a divorce, which is like, people just need to try harder. Oh, they're taking the easy way out. People are just not committed to each other the way there's all these like narratives that I think completely erase the reality that people going through divorce are experiencing, which is that it is like absolutely so painful, and there is no easy divorce,
And also, I imagine there might be things that you pick up in a broader cultural ethos about what it means to go through divorce as a woman. That's basically like, drop his ass, girlfriend.
On the other extreme, yes.
Or like, you owe this to yourself, or like,
Right.
that maybe do play into some of the cultural stereotypes about maybe individualism or like empowerment.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I heard some of that as I was going through divorce too. I think it felt very lonely, even though I had a lot of friends trying to support me through that, including lots of hotel rooms with you in different cities. I think that it was just a period where I had to truly wrestle through all of those narratives that I had been offered from church friends and my parents, to the sort of like, just move on. Like, it was very hard to find my way through that.
Yeah. Well, I thought we could do a little Kate Bowler moment here and list some of the not very helpful things that people can say to their friends and family who are facing a divorce. So what would you say are maybe the top 3 things one ought not to say to their friends who are facing this?
Okay. I think I have 3 categories of things.
Ooh, I love a categorization. Break it down for me.
I found these 3 categories very hard to handle, or I didn't quite know what to do with them. And I think the first category was the sort of fix it category. All of these are well-meaning.
Right.
And this was maybe early on when I sort of was like first telling people. There was a certain kind of response that was like, well, have you tried therapy? Have you done this? What about going on a vacation together? Maybe you just need to
spice things up.
Yeah. Yes. Just
for Jesus.
Wear different lingerie.
Have you considered a new thong?
Which, really almost worked. I tried it.
If all else fails, there are thongs.
And it was just like, of course I've tried all of those things. Like, I think there were people who knew us well enough as a couple to be able to offer some kind of advice. But I think most of those moments that were actually helpful came from me asking for advice. The sort of unsolicited was very difficult because it imagined that I had an agency that at the time I really didn't have. I had someone tell me they wanted a divorce and not really be willing at that particular time, especially early on, to do anything. I mean, he just sort of left.
Yeah.
And eventually he came back and we did try. But at that time, at the beginning, it was like, I can't fix this. Like, I have nothing I can do. So I think that was the first category. I think the second category, again, well-meaning, was the sort of he's the worst category. And by that, I mean like people telling me all the things they didn't like about him.
Yeah. I want to go on record to say, I don't think I ever knew your ex enough one way or the other. I hope I didn't participate in this.
I don't think you did because, I don't think you knew him very well because we became friends kind of after, more so.
But I know I have done a version of this with girlfriends who have gone through, like, I just think tell me why you found it unhelpful.
Well, I also think every divorce is different, which is maybe part of the difficulty in being a friend through a divorce,
Yes.
Because some guys really are the worst.
Right. If there's a situation where I find out that a girlfriend's ex-husband has cheated on her or has hidden something significant from her, I'm going to have thoughts about that behavior, not only because, like, I think it's wrong, but because of how deeply it hurt my friend. In those moments, you want your friend to feel like this was on him.
And there might have been moments where that was helpful, but I think that for the most part, especially early on, I was just too sad and I loved him so much. And so I just didn't have the anger. And maybe I needed to at some point. My therapist thought I needed to get angrier. I didn't want to go there. I didn't. And in some ways, because I still really wanted to save the marriage, I did want to hear that it was his fault because I didn't want it to be my fault, obviously. But I didn't really want to hear people like piling on him. I certainly didn't want to hear that you all along thought these bad things about him.
Yeah, the whole like, well, now that you're getting a divorce, I'm going to tell you my honest thoughts about your spouse. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that feels a little tacky. I guess if it's like, honestly, I observed this behavior and I thought it was disrespectful to you, or like it gave me pause, that's different. But like trashing someone's character, maybe not the most helpful. Okay, what's the third?
The third is, you were sort of hinting at it earlier, when it was becoming very apparent that we were going to get a divorce. I heard a sort of message that was like, well, now you can find yourself. It was similar to the sort of like drop his ass message of just female empowerment that, I don't want to universalize this because this might be helpful for other people. But at the time, for me, any message that was like hope beyond this, that tried to put some kind of silver lining on what I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I didn't want a silver lining on it.
I feel like the like, now you can find yourself under the Tuscan sun vibe.
Yes.
I know this is painting in broad brushstrokes. It feels tied to an earlier generation of women. And in a lot of those stories, you really do feel like it was the case that women were expected to do everything for their husbands and never follow their own interests or pursuits. And so I understand culturally why divorce has come to be framed as that for women. And I don't doubt that, after divorce, there can be some element of like learning more about yourself or gaining insight, independence. But when you're going through it, what you want, I imagine, is for someone to sit with you and say, this is so hard. I am so sorry you're going through this. This is the worst thing you've ever gone through. So what is helpful? Maybe words are not helpful. Maybe it's more presence.
I think presence is a lot of it. This is probably true for lots of things. So not just going through a divorce, but in my experience of going through a divorce, I think letting the person going through it guide the conversation. Like maybe your friend really does need to talk about all the ways that her ex-husband is awful, or needs to imagine what a better life on the other side can look like, or asks for advice on what to do. I think you've got to let people go there because, again, I do think every divorce is so different. I imagine it is a lot different if someone has cheated on you, or a lot different if you have cheated, or if you're the one who wants a divorce, you know?
I'm going to sound like my parents, but I'm going to say it. Or if there are children involved.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I don't know what it's like to go through a divorce and to have children. I imagine that is considerably harder and different, and a layer of negotiation and, emotion that is very different. The thing is that the whole find yourself thing, it did end up being true.
Well, I know New York City has a lot to do with that for a lot of people.
Of course. I have this memory, right? The day that our divorce was final, that we went to the courthouse and did the thing. At that point, it was, we'd been living apart for a long time and whatever, but it was still really hard. I have this memory, though, of after leaving the courthouse and saying goodbye, I just needed to do something different, to do something that day. And so I went to an antique store. And when I was there, I bought a bed frame, a big brass bed. I feel like that was like the beginning of something, it was like a claiming of, okay, I will be sleeping alone now. I mean, I already was, but symbolically.
Right.
And I'm going to make a new life.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun. I wasn't like, yay, exciting. But it was a sort of like, it was a claiming of an independence. I bought a bed that I would never have bought with him. Like we had a very distinct style. And I was like, I'm going to have a different style. And that ended up being, for me, when I moved to New York, my apartment was like the first place I feel like I really flexed in that way, where I was like, decorating my apartment, filling it with things that I really loved that felt very different from the style and the renovations and the things that we had done. That was like the beginning of saying, I'm going to have my own life, and just sort of like beginning to define it.
It was kind of the first step toward really accepting this is over. And given that reality, I'm going to have my own space for the first time as an adult.
Yeah. And I think of that period as a sort of classic, like, two things can be true at once moment. Like I can hold this grief and this pain and this loss in one hand, and I can also hold an excitement and a glimmer of hope in another hand. And moving to New York felt that way. And it felt like some days were so much about discovering myself and becoming independent and finding a resilience and learning to cook for myself and like all these things, right? That slowly over time became more and more who I was. But also there were days where all I could do was just like cry in my apartment, and like order Thai food again.
That Pad CU has seen me through a lot of dark days.
So many dark places.
I know that the days of you crying in your apartment eating Thai food were not like your new reality. They were just one piece of an unfolding grief, as well as living into a new life that has led you eventually toward marrying someone new. How do you think that being previously married has shaped how you have thought about or entered into marriage a second time? You did stock up on thongs, first of all.
That's right. Another fun evangelical narrative is that men leave their wives because they're not sexy enough. So I made sure to buy a lot of thongs.
I mean, I think John's happy so far. I'm just kidding. I have no way of knowing this. I have no way of knowing this. John and I do not talk about this.
It's a relief. I will say that letting go of the brass bed has been very difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense.
First of all, it's a double bed, so it's not, in fact, a great bed for two people. So I have had to let it go, although it is still like kind of in like a little storage spot. I loved being single in the end. And those years were really important to me. And it has been harder than I thought it would be to let that go, which we've talked about before. I think for me, getting remarried has been equal parts like just the joy of being with someone and sharing a life with someone. And I have had to train myself not to be like looking over my shoulder and like waiting, and living in a kind of fear that this isn't real, that this is going to end, or like constantly looking for the thing that might be the beginning of the end. Like in a divorce, you do a lot of forensic work. Like what went wrong? What happened? When did it go wrong? What signs did I miss? What could I have fixed earlier if I had just realized? There's a temptation to bring that into a remarriage of like, I am not going to let it go off the rails. Like I am going to watch for the little things.
Hypervigilance.
Yes. Right.
Because if I'm extra aware and looking for any potential problems, then I can prevent this from happening again. Which it is important to be self-reflective and communicative. And also, you don't want to be looking for problems on the horizon. You don't want to be fixated on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for a while, John felt like I just didn't trust him. And I think that's been something we've had to kind of work through is like ways I can let go of that fear, but also like he has definitely had like a graciousness about, being like, okay, this is some woundedness.
Yeah. Roxy and I have been waiting to have Melissa Moore on for a while, and we are so excited to talk to her today.
I started to see myself as a vow breaker. I very much resonate with being a divorced person. Like, I'm a divorced and remarried person. I'm not just married. So is my husband. That was also important to me. I know it's not necessarily important for other people, but I feel like we constantly live in the complexity of that.
Our conversation with Melissa is coming up after the break.
But first, a shout out to our sponsors who make this all possible.
Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
From the pews to the polls, RNS has covered religion perfectly.
Perfectly.
As is humanly possible.
It's a good caveat.
We do have a new review on Apple.
Oh, do we?
From Sam Waldron. He says, the conversations between Katelyn and Roxy are both deep and witty. The way they unpack important topics landing at the intersections of faith and culture is thoughtful, engaging every time.
Wow.
Sam, we hope this episode doesn't let you down.
Exactly. We'd love to hear your feedback and ideas for future guests and topics. Drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts or shoot us an email at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com. We'd love to hear from you. Melissa Moore is a writer and leader with Living Proof Ministries alongside her mom, Beth Moore. We're delighted to have Melissa on the show.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Melissa. Roxy and I have really been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Me too.
Melissa, I remember when I saw on social media, I think it was about this time last year, that you had met a man and you were getting married, and just there was so much joy and happiness that came across in what you shared, and so many notes of congratulations. This this gives me hope, I guess, that we had met in person last March, and at the time, I believe you had just recently reconnected with the man that you're married to now. So life can change quickly. Maybe you tell us, maybe in this first season, this initial season of marriage, what is bringing you joy?
Oh my goodness. I just like the day-to-day companionship, the little stuff during the day, the eating with someone, waking up with someone, the funny stuff that people don't see. Also, like, knowing that the time I'm investing is something that we both are invested in. So I spent 10 years after my first marriage was over, like 10 years dating. And that was always my frustration, is the time that I am giving and the love that I'm giving. Like, I don't know where it's going. And, I know love isn't lost in that way, but time feels like it's lost.
Yeah.
It's been really fun. And I'm also a stepmom. So, and I say stepmom really loosely because I feel like I'm more like just an aunt. My husband's kids are really well parented. And so I'm kind of an aunt, and I'm loving that. There's been a lot to learn about that. And so I really do feel like it has been such a season of just learning new things and relearning new patterns, definitely trying to do things differently than I've done them before.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to get to that. But I remember when you and I had brunch like many, many moons ago in New York City. And we were both just like a few years past our divorce and many years still from getting remarried.
That's right.
I feel like I remember you telling me that at the time you didn't think you wanted to get married again. What changed for you?
Gosh. And that was before I started like a 4-year dating relationship. And I was still asking a lot of those questions. Like, do I really want to get married? I was asking that question all the way through that relationship, pretty much all the way through my 30s, I think. I was asking that question. I think actually it's kind of a sad story, because at the end of my last relationship, not my marriage, but the relationship that I was in right after you and I hung out, you and I both had serious relationships before we got married.
And we both moved across the country for those relationships.
Yeah, of course. Of course we did. Yes, of course we did. So I think it was actually the demise of that relationship that made me realize, actually, I do want to be remarried. But I'm probably never going to be remarried, because I think I felt like I was out of chances for
Mhm.
love. Not like out of chances with God and he was like, no more for you, but I just felt like it's already hard to find anyone that I'm interested in at all,
Mhm.
Mhm.
especially men. I'm sorry to say that, but most of the people that I'm interested in
Mhm.
as people are women. Like, I find them more interesting. So I just thought my chances are really slim. Being single for me was also very exciting. I loved
Mhm.
feeling like I could do whatever I wanted within reason, as you know. But like,
Mm,
I
sure.
liked how light I felt. I didn't feel
Yeah.
like the lack of like so many. And I think, frankly, I think it's a Christian value as well. Like, I think marriage can be, but like, I also think singleness within the vision that Paul
Right.
casts, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about not having all of those worldly, is the language he uses, you don't have those worldly ties. So you're freed up to do what you feel like God is calling you to do in whatever
Mhm.
season that is. So
Mhm.
like, I really liked that
Mm.
about being single. But the main reason I thought I don't want to get married is because I kept looking and realizing how little fruit there was from these relationships. Like,
Mm.
it's not to say that I wasn't enjoying them. They just weren't working out,
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I had to ask a lot of things about myself. Like, is there something about me? Am I not capable of the kind of intimacy that this kind of relationship demands? And I did a lot of therapy because I started to believe in my core, I'm not capable of getting married.
When you met the person you're now married to, and I believe you had known each other
Oh,
for
sorry.
a while and you had reconnected, what about that relationship as it unfolded felt like, okay, this is something different? And I realize, actually, I do have what it takes to love somebody and love them in the way that a marriage or, in the beginning, like a serious dating relationship heading toward marriage entails.
Well, I felt like what I had to give him was what he needed, first of all, instead of like me trying to give and it not being what he needed, which is, and vice versa. Like, the things that I felt like he was able to give me emotionally or just in terms of companionship felt it was a fit. It's so silly to say this, but like, there were just some things that were easy. I felt like I was like trying to hike Mount Everest in other relationships, trying to make some of these things work. Whereas with my husband, they just did, and I
Mhm.
didn't have to work so hard. That doesn't mean I don't have to work, but like, some of the things that were hindrances just weren't anymore.
For me personally, it doesn't feel particularly helpful or healthy to like compare the two people I've been married to, even though I think that can be kind of like low hanging fruit. So without asking you to do that, I do wonder if there are ways you're finding your second marriage to be different, not necessarily because the men are different, but because you're so different.
Yes. The biggest thing I could say is I am married, like really married. And it's odd because even when I was married the first time, I didn't really feel married. I don't know how to describe it.
Hmm.
We were married because we said our vows and because the demise of that marriage so deeply impacted me. And it still impacts me, but it just felt so fragile. And
Hmm.
we were not committed to each other in the way that we ought to have been. And we were immature. We got married at 25 or 26, and that's old enough for a lot of people to be mature, but not for us for whatever reason. And we just didn't love each other well. I think we were
Mhm.
selfish about certain things that, looking back, makes me sad. But we didn't share the same values, and I mean that in the most significant way. So I was in this weird phase of my life where I was just very open, okay? He was in this strange phase of his life where he was open in a different way. He
Mhm.
had formerly been fairly antagonistic to Christianity. So we met and got married in a time that I think was not really a true time for us.
That's
Mm.
interesting.
I don't know if that's the right way of saying it or if he would put it that way, but what happened in our marriage is that very quickly our true values became apparent. And he was
Mhm.
married into a very serious evangelical family.
Royalty, we might say.
I mean, this poor man, the amount of women's ministry conferences he went to, and the time I didn't want to apologize to him for it, because I'm like, I would never describe myself as having settled for my ex-husband. He is an amazing person. Everyone who meets him loves him. But we did not have any of the same values, literally. And when we got married, we both got more intense in that way. I became my normal fundamentalist self, and he became increasingly uncomfortable with evangelicalism. We couldn't make decisions in the same way. Everything became sort of contested. Finances, how we spend our time, how we spend our weekends. Do we go to church?
Yeah.
That was another good one. So he and I were on a church planting team. I remember when somebody asked the two of us to serve communion. And I said, I'm not serving communion together, because I knew the truth about what was going on, which is he was really uncomfortable being there. So over time, he ended up leaving. That wasn't really the end for me, but it also opened up a time where he became really uncertain whether he wanted to have children. And this was the big one for me, because at 30, it's ironic hearing me, because I don't have children. So you're like, oh, do you end a marriage because of something like this? But at age 30, for someone to say, I'm never having children, I wasn't really able to accept that information at that time. And I think that was probably the biggest one for me, that I started to feel like there are too many things that I can't accept. And I think that he felt the same way. I think that he felt like he had to compromise the things that matter to him, even philosophically. Gosh, it would have been great if it was like, not great. I shouldn't put it that way, but I think people wanted salacious details,
Yes,
and there
right.
weren't really salacious details to give. And I shouldn't act like that's a small thing, because I don't wish those kind of things for anyone. But for me, I think there was a certain ambiguity, moral ambiguity in what I was facing. And this is why it's been really important to me along the way. Like, if I'm speaking about somebody in a situation, there are people who have biblical grounds to get divorced, at least according to some people's interpretation. But for me, I don't fall under that category. So I always knew it was a very morally ambiguous thing for me to do when I got divorced. I knew that I was giving up on a possible future of where God could work, where God could intervene. But I feel like I had to make the decision based on the information I had in the moment. I stand by it, and I felt God's mercy in it. I also very much feel like I experienced God's discipline along the way for certain behaviors and certain just various things. Like, I don't think I was only experiencing the mercy of God at times. I think I was experiencing chastisement as a child of God as well. It's been a long journey.
This is the first time one of our guests has mentioned the chastisement of the Lord.
I feel like we need more information about this.
What did that feel like? What was that?
I think for me, it was just a knowing. Like, this isn't random. Like, I really feel like I'm experiencing God's discipline here. I felt that, I felt that in my spirit. It's not like God told me that. But I also think from scripture that it's a normal thing that happens with the children of God.
I have so many questions. I mean, it sounds like you recognize, given my circumstances, divorce is not actually permissible according to scriptural interpretation. So how did you deal with that? And then maybe more broadly, how did that fact affect or shape your relationship with God?
I think for me, like, I started to see myself as a vow breaker. I very much resonate with being a divorced person. Like, I'm a divorced and remarried person. I'm not just married. So is my husband. That was also important to me. I know it's not necessarily important for other people, but I feel like we constantly live in the complexity of that. I mean, when I'm looking at my husband's children, I'm looking at, his former marriage. Like, I feel like his former spouse is always with us in some way, and we run into each other at games and we talk about homework. And so there's something really honest to me about that. And that's true to me with my own experience, which is I always feel like my ex-husband is sort of around, not in a creepy way, but just I don't forget him, like in many ways that marriage wasn't very long. It was 5.5 years and I was divorced for twice that time. This is when I started to really believe in marriage, was dealing with the repercussions of it. Like, holy crap, how did that marriage create this kind of impact on me? And in so many ways, it felt like it was a pretty shallow version of a marriage. It made me respect it in a different way on the other side and dealing with the ramifications. Gosh, I had 2 therapists along the way. One was in Houston right when I got divorced, and then stopped seeing her like somewhere around like in the middle of that, and then again saw someone in the Portland, Oregon area. But she said, I remember asking her, how long does healing take on the other side of the end of a marriage? So she said, well, how long were you married? And I said, 5.5 years. She said, well, probably at least that long. And I remember thinking, I don't have that kind of time. Like, I need to get my life back together before then,
What are some of the strengths that you would say that you're bringing because you had those years of singleness, that you went through a divorce, that you've worked through all of this? What are the strengths you would say you're bringing into a marriage now? And maybe also on the flip side, like some of the baggage.
The biggest thing is gratitude. I mean, just feeling like something is so precious. At that age, at 25 to 30, you feel like you could meet anyone at any point.
Yeah, it's true.
When you fast forward 10 years from there, everything starts to feel different. The fact that you could meet someone and fall in love seems impossible. Also, the great thing for me about being divorced is just automatically somebody knows about you that you probably made mistakes. I mean, so I'm not saying every divorced person has. I'm truly not. I made my own mistakes, and something that I wanted to work out didn't work out. My husband and I know that about each other. And so it is easier to apologize. It's easier to say, hey, are we understanding each other correctly? I think because there's more humility, and also just wanting to do it well. But on the flip side, there are definitely patterns that, like, both of us, like, there will be times that, like, if we're getting in an argument and I can feel, I could feel like the wall just, you know what I mean? And I'm just gone. Because for me, it's like, is this the end? I start to feel the things that I felt in those moments because I knew where things were headed. And my mom said to me, probably a month or 2, maybe 2 months after we had gotten married, Melissa, like, you're going to have to tell your nerves, like your nervous system, like to settle down because you're okay. Like, you really are okay. But I was just kind of like walking around with my shoulders up to my ears, like just so tense. And I started really saying that to myself, like, I'm in a different marriage. Like, this is something reliable.
Maybe as a final note, for any listeners that are facing divorce or going through a divorce or recently out of a divorce, like fellow Christians who are obviously in a time of pain or may feel like confusion or that despair that you had mentioned before, what would you say to them as a bit of encouragement?
It won't last forever. What got me going was just the curiosity of seeing what could shift. Like, how is life going to change? I know it will, but how? And especially as a Christian, like, I knew, like, I'm on an adventure with God. I really am. God is with me, and God's good company, and God's been good company with me all these years. Sometimes these things, they sound cliche, but like, I really believe them. We don't have to get into all the dating, but I think keep meeting people. Like, it's important, like, just to have friends and companions. And some of the Christian dating scene is so dire. People don't hang out. And everything is so centered on just getting married. And it's like, keep meeting people and know that the intensity of despair is probably not going to last forever.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah.
This was a lovely conversation.
Thanks for joining us and talking about this, even though I know it's not the easiest topic.
Tender. Yes. Thank you.
It's good to see y'all.
What's the best thing about being remarried, Roxy? Not just married, specifically to John, not just like another random guy.
Part of it is recognizing that there is no perfect person and that you are the person that you bring into any marriage. And I am different coming into this marriage, but I have delighted in having both so much fun with John. He's one of the most fun people and can make any event like a delightful time. And also he will make sure that there's some kind of like significance. He really like marks things and honors things. I have loved just discovering him. And also, I think discovering a side of myself with him and opening up new parts of myself.
Fun and thoughtful is a great description of John. I don't know him as well as you do, but that is absolutely true about events, what he brings to gatherings of people. And I feel like that is kind of what you specifically would need in a partner. The ability to be both like light and playful and energetic, and also someone who can really dig into the deep stuff. I know that we have that, but I recognize I can't meet all of your needs for that.
I mean, almost. The podcast is so close to a marriage.
What does that make our producer? Maybe we're polygamists.
Oh, no. Saved by the City is a religion news service production. The producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. We get production assistance from Julia Wyndham.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Roxy Stone
and Caitlin Beatty.
Thanks for listening.
For listening.